This presentation on autistic burnout and dissociation was part of a monthly meeting for the Northwest Suburbs chapter of the International Society for Trauma and Dissociation. It's a presentation I did for other therapists. Just a heads up, the client examples are not exact in all detail and are designed to preserve anonymity. Autism and trauma. Autistic people on average, this was, okay, so I got a lot of this from an article in a larger book. So dissociation and autistic spectrum disorders, I believe the larger book is on dissociation and trauma, and this was a chapter from it, but it's very, very good. So I'm just going to read a few of her quotes, their quotes. Traumatic experiences are unfortunately very common for autistic individuals. Much research has been done on autistic social isolation, lack of caregiver attunement, and peer rejection and harassment. However, autistic adults, and especially children, are also at an increased risk of neglect, abuse, and assault, including from parents, other family members, disability caregivers, peers, intimate partners, and unknown other individuals. I did not know that, but it makes sense. And, you know, a huge variable in all kinds of trauma is, do you have those protective relationships? Do you have an attachment figure who sees your distress and cares and has the ability to perhaps decrease your distress? So when you have autism, you're less likely to have those protective relationships. Due to differences in social communication, autistic people often have a difficult time forming close relationships, which might otherwise be protective. They may also struggle to recognize when a predator means them harm because they cannot see the social signals. Intellectual disability or uneven cognitive profiles, which are common in autism, may worsen difficulties recognizing ill intentions and also increase perceived vulnerability. And I will say, if anyone who has a history of trauma, whether or not you have autism, that impairs your ability to perceive ill will in other people, to some extent often. And so this is crossover, but then if you have autism, or if you are autistic, see, I'm working on it, it's even more so, because if you can't read someone's facial expression, you have one less tool for distinguishing, even without attachment trauma, even if you don't have it, from distinguishing, does this person going to support me or are they using me? Other emotional and behavioral challenges may also increase the individual's alienation from potential sources of protection, perceived vulnerability, and likelihood of being in risky situations. And then one more on here. And this has to do with the idea that shame is as much, unremitting shame and humiliation is as much a cause of trauma as things that are terrifying and fearful. I've talked about that in other contexts, but I think that's an important thing to know for this as well. Autistic individuals experience especially high rates of bullying and discrimination, leading not just to fear, but shame, which contributes to PTSD. A couple quotes from the same chapter. A majority of autistic individuals experience bullying during childhood and adulthood. Some of this bullying is likely focused on the traits and behaviors of the autistic individual, while some of it might be motivated by the diagnosis itself. And an important outcome of disability stigma, which is beyond bullying specifically, is shame. Unlike fear, which may result from violence and threats of harm, shame is strongly associated with degradation, boundary violations, and social isolation. Individuals may feel shame not only for what others have done to them, but for who they are. So an additional source of trauma that compounds each one of these things, as many autistic individuals learn to mask, hiding, or even dissociating, which I suspect happens way more than is discussed. Hiding or dissociating their distress in response to sensory stimuli and copying neurotypical social skills. So this person is both, people are both then managing an inherent threat of social rejection and operating constantly under the belief or maybe even knowledge that they would not get the same support or social engagement if they were more genuine. But also, the person's nervous system is experiencing sensory distress without relief because it can't exist, right? When you're masking, meaning you're trying to present as if you do not have autism, then inherently you have to, and I think actually dissociation happens more than people realize. That sensory distress, or put it in the back of your mind, not focus on it to some degree, which then means you have distress without relief. And so that's another source of trauma. So, quote here, stigma and internalized shame cause many autistic individuals to try to camouflage or mask their autistic traits. They may copy neurotypical individuals' speech, dress, body language, and facial expressions, as well as try to hide their reactions to overwhelming or aversive sensory stimuli in an attempt to be accepted by others. Masking can contribute to feeling disconnected from or confused about one's true self, again, dissociation for who one actually is, reinforced by shame and kept in place by shame. But also, this is exhausting and may require engaging in dangerous behaviors, i.e. disordered eating or substance abuse to maintain, which is very similar to trauma, leads to emotional distress that has no relief. And so the best way to get immediate relief is addiction, right? Or suicidality. The ultimate relief, but also fantasizing about suicidality as an escape mechanism, which is also, suicide as fantasy can have, in a way, an addicting escape function for the person and settles their nervous system. Okay, now a little bit about polyvagal. I know this is a lot, but just, I think for anyone who doesn't have the background, just keeping it simple. The vagus nerve is the main nervous nerve, which is obviously a system of nerves, as you can see in the picture, of our parasympathetic nervous system, which we know from our back in the day of biology as the system that helps us to rest and digest. So this is a drawing of our ventral vagus nerve. It's called ventral because it moves to the front half of our body, spreading through our face and moving down our neck to our heart. When this ventral vagus nerve is active, we feel safe and it's easier to connect with, that's a missing word there, to connect with ourselves, others, the world, and our spirituality. Physically, when it is active, myelin, some of our nerves are myelinated. I don't know if people remember that from biology, but it's the waxy covering on our nerves that some nerves need. And for the vagus nerve, if you have, the more experiences you have of that physiological safety, the thicker that wax covering is, and therefore the easier it is to have a sense of safety physiologically. And the other part of the vagus nerve is the dorsal vagus nerve, which goes down the back of the spine to all these organs. Not just your heart. Yeah, your heart, your lungs, your liver, your stomach. And if and only if the vagus nerve is active, meaning you feel safe, then the dorsal vagus nerve, this back part, is able to help you rest and digest so that our digestion works well and we can sleep well. So just a sense of, I'm going to have a chart that has green, yellow, and red. So you're going to see it soon, but we're going to preface this, the green zone as peace. When both parts of the vagus nerve are active, we feel calm and at peace. In this state, it is easy to feel compassion for others. It's also easier to engage in meditative prayer and any spirituality practice, and to feel connected to nature. In this state, we may seek to lean into someone we trust, animal or human. And I suspect also that the deep pressure that we all crave physiologically, but many autistic people have found, and people with trauma also find this very comforting, in weighted blankets and other kinds of things causing deep pressure, Temple Grandin's squeeze machine, also help get you into this zone. The second green zone, number 2, is positive energy. So when you're the ventral vagus nerve is active and your sympathetic nervous system is active, which we associate with fight or flight, but is honestly the system that powers any kind of energy. When the sympathetic nervous system is with the vagus nerve, we feel energy without feeling threatened. So this allows us to actively engage in interacting with others, exploring the world, enjoying exercise for those people who can. Yes, and exploring the world is also exploring ideas. So in autism, this might be, getting into whatever that specialized knowledge area is that you're geeking out on. Creatively expressing ourselves and being able to feel enthusiasm and excitement. So you need that vagus nerve that helps you feel safe. And then when you're not in rest and digest mode, you have that mode of having energy. All right, so I'm going to show you the graph. We're going to keep coming back. But for now, what I've been talking about is ways of being that exist in the green zone on the bottom. You see the traits: calmness and connection, settled, grounded, curiosity, openness, being able to feel compassion, being able to be mindful and in the present. And on the right are many, many things that it does well for your body. Okay, so we go on to yellow. When our sympathetic nervous system is activated and our ventral vagus nerve is not, we are in a state of threat, commonly known as fight or flight. And if we go back to our list of things that can be considered traumatic, any of those things are going to put us initially, at least, in the state of fight or flight. And I've been thinking a lot in the context of autism about how aggravating it must be to have sensory distress that doesn't go away, and how that is going to raise irritation or anxiety by itself. And certainly interpersonal threat, all the threats we talked about earlier. And so this zone of fight or flight, sympathetic activation in the yellow, is the one that almost everyone in our culture identifies with stress. And it does the predictable things to the body that stress does: increases your blood pressure on the right, heart rate, gives you fuelability, gives you energy to, fight the attacker or run, adrenaline, extra oxygen in you. And so you naturally take deep breaths in, but you cannot release oxygen because your body wants lots of oxygen to have lots of energy. And that's also why in panic attacks, people say, I can't breathe, but they're actually holding their oxygen in. And that can't breathe feeling is actually, I can't release my oxygen, just FYI. Increased pupil size, blood clotting, dilation of bronchi, defensive responding. And then decreasing your digestion, less salivation, less relational ability, meaning less ability. If you're in this state, you cannot read, you cannot notice as easily when people are expressing or not being threatening. Because when physiologically we are in a state of threat, we experience other people as threatening. And, I think, and there's obvious crossovers here for me for autism and people who have been chronic trauma, interpersonal trauma, right? So if around people, I'm in a state of threat, well, the interesting thing is that also keeps me from taking in signals of non-threat. And then if you have autism and it's hard to read facial expressions and body expressions, that's also a reason that it's hard to take in. Like we talked about autistic people not realizing when somebody's threatening because they don't read that. Well, it can go the reverse way too. That if you've been bullied a lot and treated badly, you can't read the signals that someone's not a threat. And if you come in and you're already on edge around people, I mean, a smile can be a warm smile, but it also can be a smile of superiority, right? Eye contact can be warm or it can be judging. And if you're solidly in that yellow state, you're hyper attuned to interpersonal threat. If you're in that state, even if people are trying to communicate they're not a threat to you, they may still feel like they're a threat to you. Thank you for watching part 2 of my presentation on autistic burnout and dissociation. You're welcome to go on to part 3. Also, feel free to click the link below to subscribe. Thank you for watching part 1 of my presentation on autistic burnout and dissociation. Please go on to part 2, and also feel free to click the link below to subscribe.